Commander Sarah Chun stood in front of the large window on the bridge of the ship. She looked out at the stars and felt tired. 3 months ago, the war had ended. 3 months ago, humanity had won against the Zephyrian hegemony. But winning the war was just the first step. Now came the hard part. The ship she stood on was not a human ship. It used to belong to the enemy. The Zephyrians had called it the Star of Dominion. Now humans called it Justice Station. The name fit better. Sarah turned around and walked toward the elevator. The ship was huge. It took 10 minutes to walk from one end to the other. The Zephyrians had built it to show their power. Now it would serve a different purpose. She pressed the button. For level 7. That was where they kept the prisoners. As the elevator moved down, Sarah thought about the past year. The hegemony had attacked without warning. 12 different alien species had joined together to destroy humanity. They said humans were dangerous. They said humans were a mistake that needed to be fixed. The elevator stopped and opened. 2 guards stood at attention. They were both young. Too young to have seen the worst parts of the war. Sarah envied them for that. She walked down the long hall. On both sides were cells with thick glass walls. Inside each cell was a different alien. Some looked like giant insects. Others looked like walking plants. A few looked almost human, but with strange colors and extra arms. These aliens had once commanded fleets of ships. They had ordered the bombing of human cities. They had watched as millions of humans died. Now they sat in small rooms and waited. Sarah stopped at the first cell. Inside sat Krikstal, the former leader of the hegemony. He was tall and thin with blue skin and 4 arms. His large black eyes followed Sarah as she approached. "Commander Chun," Krikstal said through the speaker in his cell. His voice was calm and cold. "Have you come to gloat about your victory?" Sarah did not answer right away. She studied his face. Krikstal showed no sign of guilt or shame. To him, the war had been necessary. Humans were pests that needed to be removed. "I came to tell you that the trial starts tomorrow," Sarah said. "You will have a chance to speak. You will have lawyers to help you. You will get a fair trial." Krikstal laughed. It was not a happy sound. "Fair? You speak of fairness? Your species knows nothing of order. You breed without control. You fight without reason. You expand without permission. The galaxy is better without your chaos." Sarah felt anger rise in her chest. This creature had ordered the deaths of her friends. He had watched as human children were killed, but she kept her voice steady. "Maybe," she said. "But we won, and now we decide what happens next?" She walked to the next cell. Inside was a creature that looked like a large spider with a human head. This was Velenix, a general from the Arachnid Legion. Unlike Krikstal, this one looked afraid. "Please," Velenix said when he saw Sarah. "I was only following orders. My people were forced to fight. We did not want war with humans." Sarah had heard this story before. Some of the alien species claimed they were forced to join the war. They said the Zephyrians threatened to destroy them if they refused. Sarah did not know if this was true. That was what the trial would decide. She continued down the hall. Each cell held a different story. Some aliens were proud of what they had done. Others seemed sorry. A few claimed they had tried to help humans during the war. At the end of the hall was Dr. Marcus Webb. He was sitting at a small desk with papers spread out in front of him. Marcus was a scientist who studied alien minds. His job was to understand how these creatures thought. "How are they today?" Sarah asked. Marcus looked up. He had dark circles under his eyes. He had not been sleeping well since the war ended. Same as always. Krikstal still believes he was right. The Veltari delegation keeps asking about their families. The Crystalline Collective won't speak at all. Sarah nodded. Each species was different. Each had their own reasons for joining the war. Some had been eager to destroy humanity. Others had been afraid to refuse. The trial would have to sort out who was guilty and who was a victim. "Any word from the neutral observers?" Sarah asked. 3 more species arrived today," Marcus said. "The Ethereal Collective sent someone. They want to watch the trial." This was important. The Ethereal Collective was old. Very old. They had watched civilizations rise and fall for thousands of years. If they were interested in the trial, it meant something. Sarah walked back toward the elevator. On the way, she passed the communications room. Inside, Lieutenant Torres was monitoring messages from across the galaxy. Every day, more reports came in. Some were from human colonies that had survived the war. Others were from alien species that wanted to know what would happen next. "Commander," Torres called out, "message from Admiral Harrison." Sarah stopped. Admiral Harrison was in charge of the human fleet. He was a good soldier but a hard man. He believed the aliens should be punished severely. "What does he want?" Sarah asked. "He wants to know if you've decided on the punishments yet. He says the crews are getting restless. They want justice for their fallen friends," Sarah understood. The human soldiers had lost many people in the war. They wanted revenge. But revenge was not the same as justice. That was something Sarah had to remember. She took the elevator back to her office. The room was small but comfortable. On her desk were reports from the investigation teams. They had been studying the evidence for months. Video recordings of attacks on human cities. Orders from alien commanders. Lists of the dead. Sarah picked up one report. It was about the attack on New Geneva colony. The hegemony had used biological weapons there. Thousands of families had died slowly and painfully. Sarah had visited the colony after the war. She had seen the empty houses and silent streets. She put the report down and walked to the window. Outside, she could see human ships patrolling the area. They were protecting Justice Station from any aliens who might want to rescue the prisoners. Sarah thought about tomorrow. The trial would begin with opening statements. The whole galaxy would be watching. Some aliens would see it as weakness. They would think humans were soft for giving their enemies a trial. Others might see it as strength. They might understand that true power meant knowing when not to use it. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. It was Dr. Webb. He looked worried. "Sarah, I need to talk to you. I found something in the records. Something that might change everything." Sarah turned from the window. "What is it?" Marcus sat down and opened his tablet. "I've been studying the communication records we captured. There were aliens who opposed the war. Some tried to warn human colonies. Others sabotaged hegemony operations. This was new information." Sarah sat down across from Marcus. "How many? Hard to say. The communications were coded. But there might have been thousands of aliens who secretly helped humans during the war." Sarah felt a weight in her stomach. If this was true, then some of the aliens in the cells below might be heroes, not criminals. The trial just got much more complicated. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "I've checked the data 3 times. There was a resistance movement inside the hegemony. They called themselves the Bridge Builders." Sarah stood up and looked out the window again. Tomorrow the trial would begin. The galaxy would watch as humans decided the fate of their former enemies. But now she knew the truth was more complex than anyone had imagined. War was simple. You fought until one side won. Justice was harder. Justice required wisdom, patience, and the courage to do what was right even when it was difficult. Sarah thought about all the humans who had died in the war. They deserved justice, but so did the aliens who had risked their lives to help. Finding the balance between those two needs would be the real test of humanity. The stars outside seemed brighter now. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight Sarah would prepare. The war was over, but the judgment was just beginning. The courtroom was silent. Sarah Chun stood at the front of the large room and looked at the faces around her. Human officers sat on one side. Alien prisoners sat on the other. In the back, neutral observers watched everything with careful eyes. The room had been built quickly inside Justice Station. It was simple but dignified. A large screen covered one wall. This was where they would show the evidence that would decide the fate of entire species. "This trial will now begin," Sarah announced. Her voice carried through the room clearly. "We are here to seek justice for the crimes committed during the war. Every being in this room will be treated fairly according to human law. Crystal sat in the front row of prisoners. His 4 arms were chained together, but his black eyes showed no fear. Next to him sat other alien leaders. Some looked worried. Others seemed angry. A few appeared confused about what was happening. "The first witness will be Captain Morrison," Sarah said. A human officer stood up and walked to the witness stand. Captain Morrison was old and scarred. He had commanded the defense of New Geneva Colony when the hegemony attacked. "Captain Morrison," Sarah began, "please tell us what happened at New Geneva." Morrison cleared his throat. His hands shook slightly as he spoke. "The attack came without warning. Our sensors detected 12 hegemony ships approaching the colony. We sent a message asking them to identify themselves. They responded by firing. The large screen lit up. It showed video footage from the attack. The images were clear and terrible. Bright explosions lit up the darkness of space. Human ships tried to defend the colony but were outnumbered. "What happened next?" Sarah asked. "They broke through our defenses in 6 hours," Morrison said. "Then they began bombing the civilian areas. Schools, hospitals, homes, they targeted the places where families lived. The screen showed more footage. Buildings collapsed under the bombing. People ran through the streets trying to find safety. Children cried for their parents. The images were hard to watch. Crystal spoke from his seat. We were removing a threat to galactic peace. Human colonies spread like disease. Action was necessary." Sarah turned to face him. "You will have your chance to speak, Crystal. Right now, we are listening to the witness." She turned back to Morrison. "What happened to the survivors?" Morrison's voice became quiet. "The hegemony used biological weapons on the remaining population. A virus that attacked the nervous system. People died slowly and in great pain. By the time we retook the colony, there were only 300 survivors out of 50,000. Gasps came from some of the neutral observers. Even they had not known about the biological weapons. The ethereal, collective representative, an ancient being made of pure energy, glowed brighter for a moment. "Show us the medical reports," Sarah said. The screen displayed charts and graphs. They showed how the virus worked, how it spread through families, how children suffered before they died. The room became very quiet as people read the data. "Did the hegemony offer any chance for surrender?" Sarah asked. Morrison shook his head. "No, they said humans could not be trusted to live peacefully. Complete elimination was their goal." Sarah nodded. "Thank you, Captain. You may sit down." The next witness was Dr. Elena Rodriguez. She had been a medical officer on Kepler Station when it was attacked. Her testimony was even more disturbing. "Kepler Station was a research facility," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "We studied diseases to find cures. We helped all species, including some from the hegemony, but they attacked us anyway." The screen showed Kepler Station before the attack. It was beautiful, with gardens and laboratories floating in space. Scientists from many worlds worked together there. "The hegemony used orbital bombardment," Dr. Rodriguez continued. "They fired from orbit for 3 days straight. They did not care that we surrendered on the first day. They kept firing until nothing was left. The new footage showed the station being destroyed piece by piece. Explosions tore apart the laboratories. The gardens burned in the vacuum of space. Bodies floated among the wreckage. How many died?" Sarah asked. 12,000 researchers and their families, Dr. Rodriguez said. People from 40 different worlds. Even some hegemony scientists who were working with us. This caused movement among the prisoners. Some aliens looked surprised. They had not known that their own people died in the attacks. "The hegemony killed their own people?" Sarah asked. "Yes, they said anyone who worked with humans was contaminated. They needed to be cleansed along with us." One of the prisoners, an insect-like creature called Dexmore, stood up suddenly. "That is not true. We were told the station was a military target." Sarah looked at him calmly. "Sit down, Dexmore. Your lawyer will speak for you when it is time." The alien lawyer, a neutral species called the Mediators, whispered something to Dexmore. He sat down but looked confused and upset. The testimony continued for hours. Witness after witness told their stories. The attack on the farming world of Demeter, where the hegemony poisoned the soil so nothing could grow. The massacre at the mining station of Titan 7, where workers were killed while trying to evacuate children. Each story was worse than the last. The screen showed image after image of destruction. Cities turned to ash, ships full of refugees destroyed as they fled. Families separated and killed, but the worst testimony came from Lieutenant Sarah Park. She had been captured during the war and held prisoner by the hegemony for 6 months. They experimented on human prisoners, Park said. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. They wanted to understand how human minds worked. They thought if they could break our spirits, they could control us. What kind of experiments? Sarah asked gently. Park took a deep breath. They would show us recordings of our families being killed over and over. They measured our emotional responses. They wanted to map human pain. The room was completely silent now. Even some of the alien prisoners looked uncomfortable. They also tested biological weapons on prisoners, Park continued, different viruses and toxins. They wanted to find the most effective way to kill humans quickly. The screen showed medical records from the prison camps. Charts showing how different weapons affected human bodies. Videos of prisoners suffering and dying while alien scientists took notes. Did any aliens try to help you? Sarah asked. Park nodded. Yes, there was a guard named Veltani. She was from the Crystalline Collective. She would secretly give us extra food and medicine. She said the war was wrong. This was important. Sarah made sure the court reporter was recording everything. Did she say why she thought the war was wrong? She said her people were forced to fight. The Zephyrians threatened to destroy their homeworld if they refused. She said many aliens felt the same way but were too afraid to speak. Crystal stood up angrily. Lies! All species joined willingly. We all agreed that humans were a threat. Sit down, Sarah ordered. You will have your chance to speak. 2 guards moved toward Crystal. He sat down but continued to glare at the witness. The testimony went on. More survivors told their stories. More evidence was presented. The pattern became clear. The hegemony had planned to completely destroy humanity. They had used the cruelest methods possible. They had shown no mercy to anyone, including their own people who disagreed with the war. But there were also signs that not all aliens supported the war. Witnesses mentioned guards who showed kindness, scientists who refused to participate in experiments, pilots who deliberately missed their targets. As the day ended, Sarah felt exhausted. The weight of all the testimony pressed down on her. Tomorrow they would hear from the alien prisoners. They would have their chance to explain their actions. The neutral observers began to leave, but the ethereal collective representative approached Sarah. Commander Chun, the being said in a voice like wind chimes. In all our years of watching, we have never seen a species put their enemies on trial. This is unprecedented. What would other species do? Sarah asked. Most would simply kill their enemies or enslave them. Some would torture them for revenge. None would seek justice in this way. Sarah nodded. We are not like other species. No, the ancient being agreed. You are not. We will be very interested to see what you decide. As Sarah walked back to her quarters, she thought about the day's testimony. The evidence was clear. The hegemony had committed terrible crimes against humanity. They deserved punishment, but the hints of alien resistance troubled her. If some aliens had tried to help humans, then the situation was more complex than it appeared. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the prisoners told their side of the story. Sarah looked out her window at the stars. Somewhere out there, human colonies were rebuilding. Families were mourning their dead. Veterans were trying to forget what they had seen in the war. They all deserved justice. But what kind of justice? That was the question that would define not just this trial, but humanity's place in the galaxy. The testimony was just beginning. Sarah Chun did not sleep well that night. The testimony from the day before played in her mind over and over. She had seen war before, but hearing the details of what happened to the colonies made her feel sick and angry. She walked to the officers' meeting room early in the morning. Admiral Harrison was already there, drinking coffee and reading reports. His face was red with anger. "Did you see this?" Harrison asked, holding up a tablet. "The news feeds are calling us soft. They say we should execute all the prisoners and be done with it." Sarah sat down across from him. "What do you think we should do?" Harrison slammed his hand on the table. "I think they're right. These creatures killed millions of our people. They experimented on prisoners. They used biological weapons on children. Why are we wasting time with a trial?" "Because that's what makes us different from them," Sarah said quietly. "Different?" Harrison laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "They didn't show mercy to our children at New Geneva. They didn't give fair trials to the prisoners they tortured. Why should we be better than them?" Before Sarah could answer, Dr. Webb entered the room. He looked tired and worried. He carried a large folder filled with papers. "We have a problem," Webb said as he sat down. "I've been analyzing the psychological profiles of the prisoners. Some of them are telling the truth about being forced into the war." Harrison leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Webb opened his folder and pulled out several documents. The Veltari delegation, for example. Their homeworld was surrounded by Zephyrian ships before the war started. They were told to join the hegemony or watch their planet burn. Sarah studied the papers. They showed communication records between the Veltari government and the Zephyrian command. The threats were clear and direct. "How many species were coerced?" Sarah asked. "At least 4 that I can prove. Maybe more. The Crystalline Collective, the Veltari, the Aquatic Federation, and the Nomad clans. They all received similar threats." Harrison stood up and began pacing around the room. "So what? They still killed our people. They still followed orders to commit genocide. But if they were forced to fight, are they as guilty as the ones who chose to fight?" Webb asked. This was the question that had been bothering Sarah all night. "In human law, someone who commits a crime under threat of death is treated differently than someone who commits the same crime willingly. What about the others?" Sarah asked. "The Zephyrians, the Arachnid Legion, the Hive Mind?" Webb flipped through. More papers. Those species joined willingly. Some even encouraged the war. The Arachnid Legion specifically requested permission to use biological weapons. The Hive Mind wanted to capture humans for breeding experiments. The room fell silent. Sarah could hear the hum of the ship's engines through the walls. Outside, the stars continued their ancient dance, unaware of the moral struggle happening inside the small room. "There's more," Webb continued. "I found evidence of active resistance within some species. Groups that tried to sabotage hegemony operations. Some even tried to warn human colonies about upcoming attacks." Harrison stopped pacing. "You're saying some aliens actually helped us during the war?" "Yes, the data shows communication attempts between alien resistance groups and human forces. Most were intercepted by hegemony security, but some got through." Sarah remembered the testimony from Lieutenant Park about the guard who helped prisoners. "How many aliens were involved in this resistance?" "Hard to say exactly. The communications were coded and many records were destroyed. But there could have been thousands." Admiral Harrison sat back down heavily. His anger seemed to drain away, replaced by confusion. "So what are we supposed to do now? How do we punish the guilty ones without hurting the innocent ones?" "That's what the trial is for," Sarah said. "We need to examine each case individually. We need to find out who chose to fight and who was forced to fight." "And what about the resistance fighters?" Webb asked. "Some of them might be sitting in our prison cells right now, being treated like war criminals." This thought made Sarah feel cold. The idea that humans might be punishing aliens who had tried to help them was terrible. But how could they tell the difference between real resistance fighters and prisoners who were lying to save themselves? A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Lieutenant Torres entered with a message pad. "Commander, we have a problem. 3 more alien delegations arrived overnight. They want to observe the trial." Sarah took the message pad and read it. The Merchant Guild, the Scientific Alliance, and the warrior clans had all sent representatives. These were powerful groups. that controlled large parts of the galaxy. What do they want? Harrison asked. They want to see how we handle justice, Torres said. Some of them are worried that humans will become the new galactic bullies. Others are curious about our legal system. Sarah understood. The entire galaxy was watching this trial. If humans showed mercy, some aliens might see it as weakness. If they showed cruelty, others might fear human expansion. Every decision would have consequences far beyond this courtroom. There's something else, Torres continued. We received a secret message from someone calling themselves the Bridge Builders. They claim to be alien resistance fighters. They want to testify at the trial. Webb looked up sharply. The Bridge Builders? That's the resistance group one found in the communication records. Where did the message come from? Sarah asked. We can't trace it. It was sent through multiple relay stations. But they provided verification codes that matched the resistance communications from the war. This changed everything. If real resistance fighters wanted to testify, it could prove that not all aliens supported the genocide. But it could also be a trap or a lie designed to create confusion. What do you want to do? Harrison asked Sarah. Sarah thought carefully. The trial was supposed to find the truth. If there were aliens who had fought against the hegemony, their testimony could be important. But allowing unknown aliens to speak could also be dangerous. We'll let them testify, she decided, but under heavy security. And we'll verify their stories carefully. Harrison shook his head. Sarah, this is getting too complicated. We won the war. We have the right to punish our enemies. Why are we making this so difficult? Because doing the right thing is always difficult, Sarah replied. If it was easy, everyone would do it. Later that morning, the trial resumed. The courtroom was more crowded than before. The new alien observers sat in a special section, watching everything with intense interest. Crickstall was the first prisoner to speak. He stood tall and proud, showing no sign of regret or fear. Humans are a disease, he said clearly. You spread across the galaxy without permission. You take resources that belong to others. You bring chaos wherever you go. The hegemony was right to try to stop you. Sarah listened without emotion. Do you deny that your forces killed civilians? I deny nothing. Civilians, soldiers, children, adults, all humans are equally dangerous. Complete elimination was the only solution. What about the aliens who opposed the war? What about members of your own alliance who questioned the genocide? Crickstall's black eyes narrowed. Traitors and fools. They could not see the truth about your species. They deserved whatever punishment they received. The cold certainty in his voice chilled the room. Here was someone who felt no guilt about ordering the deaths of millions. He would do it again if given the chance. The next prisoner was very different. The Linux from the Arachnid Legion trembled as he spoke. Please understand, he said through the translator. My people were starving. The Zephyrians controlled the food trade routes. They said if we did not join the war, they would cut off all supplies. Our children were dying. So you chose to kill human children instead? Sarah asked. Valanix made a sound that might have been crying. I am not proud of what we did. But what choice did we have? Let our own people die to save yours? This was the terrible choice that war forced on people. Choose between your own family and someone else's family. Most beings would choose their own. Did you personally order attacks on civilians? Sarah asked. Yes, Valanix admitted. But I tried to make them quick. I did not use biological weapons. I did not torture prisoners. I took no pleasure in the killing. Sarah made notes on her tablet. Valanix was guilty of war crimes, but his circumstances were different from Crickstall's. The question was whether those circumstances mattered for punishment. The testimony continued through the day. Each alien told a different story. Some were proud of their actions, others seemed genuinely sorry. A few claimed they had tried to minimize the damage, but the most important moment came at the end of the day. A message arrived at the bridge. Builders were ready to reveal themselves. Tomorrow, the court would hear from aliens who claimed they had fought. against their own species to help humanity. As Sarah returned to her quarters that evening, she felt the weight of the decision she would have to make. Justice demanded punishment for the guilty, but mercy demanded understanding for those who had no choice. Admiral Harrison was right about one thing: this was getting complicated. But Sarah knew that complicated problems rarely had simple solutions. Tomorrow would bring new testimony and new challenges. The war had been about survival. The trial was about something much harder, deciding what kind of species humanity wanted to be. The courtroom was packed with beings from across the galaxy. Word had spread that something important would happen today. Sarah Chung could feel the tension in the air as she called the court to order. "Today we will hear testimony from a special witness," Sarah announced. "Someone who claims to have fought against the hegemony during the war." The main doors opened and 2 human guards entered. Between them walked a young Zephyrian female. She was smaller than most of her species, with pale blue skin and large silver eyes. Unlike the other prisoners, she was not chained. Gasps came from the alien observers. Zephyrians were the leaders of the hegemony. The idea that one of them had fought against the war shocked everyone in the room. Crystal jumped to his feet. "Traitor!" he shouted. "Zareth, you betray your own species." "Sit down," Sarah ordered. Guards moved toward Crystal until he reluctantly took his seat. The young Zephyrian walked to the witness stand. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice was clear when she spoke. "My name is Zareth of the 7th Circle. I was a communications officer in the hegemony fleet. I am here to tell you about the bridge builders." Sarah leaned forward. "Tell us about this group." Zareth took a breath and began. "The bridge builders formed 6 months before the war started. We were scientists, officers, and civilians from many species. We believed the plan to destroy humanity was wrong." "How many members did you have?" "At our largest, about 3,000 beings across all species. We worked in secret to help humans whenever possible." Dr. Webb, who was sitting in the front row, wrote quick notes. 3,000 was much larger than he had estimated. "What kind of help did you provide?" Sarah asked. "We sent warning messages to human colonies about planned attacks. We sabotaged weapons shipments. We provided false information to hegemony commanders. Some of us even helped human prisoners escape." The screen lit up with data files. Zareth had brought evidence with her. Communication logs, supply records, personnel files. The proof of the resistance was overwhelming. "Show us an example," Sarah said. Zareth pressed a button on her control pad. The screen showed a message sent 3 days before the attack on Kepler Station. "This warning was sent to the station commander," Zareth explained. "It told him about the planned attack and suggested evacuation routes. Unfortunately, hegemony ships intercepted the message before it reached the station." Sarah studied the message. It was detailed and specific. Someone with inside knowledge had tried to save the people on Kepler Station. Were there other attempts to warn colonies? "Many. We successfully warned 7 colonies. Those places were evacuated before the attacks. We saved approximately 40,000 human lives." A murmur went through the courtroom. Even some of the human officers looked surprised. They had not known about the evacuated colonies. Admiral Harrison stood up. "How do we know you're telling the truth? This could all be lies to save yourself." Zareth turned to face him. "Because I have this." She held up a small device. When she activated it, holographic images appeared above the witness stand. The images showed meetings of the bridge builders, aliens from different species planning operations to help humans. "These are recordings from our secret meetings," Zareth said. "I risked my life to save them when the hegemony discovered our group." The holograms showed incredible scenes. A crystalline being providing fake shipping schedules to delay weapon deliveries. An arachnid officer deliberately missing human targets during battle. A Veltari scientist destroying biological weapon samples. "What happened when you were discovered?" Sarah asked. Zareth's voice became sad. "Crystal ordered all suspected bridge builders to be executed. Over 2,000 of our members were killed. The rest went into hiding." She pointed at Crystal. He personally oversaw many of the executions. He said we were contaminated by human ideas and needed to be cleansed. Crixtal stood up again. They were traitors to their own species. They chose alien lives over their own people. We chose right over wrong, Zareth replied firmly, something you never understood. Sarah maintained order as the two Zephyrians stared at each other with obvious hatred. This was personal for both of them. Tell us about the other species, Sarah said. Which ones had resistance movements? Zareth activated another hologram. This one showed a map of the galaxy with different colored dots. Every species in the hegemony had some resistance, she said. The Veltari had the largest group. Almost 10% of their military secretly helped humans. The Crystalline Collective had fewer members, but they controlled important supply routes. What about the Arachnid Legion? The Legion was split? About half supported the war completely. The other half was forced to participate but tried to minimize damage. Many Arachnid pilots deliberately missed their targets or warned human ships about attacks. This information changed everything. Sarah realized that the war had not been as united as it appeared. While some aliens eagerly joined the genocide, others had risked their lives to prevent it. Do you have evidence of individual acts of resistance? Sarah asked. Yes, I have files on over 500 specific operations. Bridge builders who sabotaged equipment, delayed attacks, helped prisoners escape, or provided intelligence to human forces. The screen filled with names and records. Operation reports showing successful sabotage missions. Communication logs of warnings sent to human colonies. Medical records of bridge builders who were tortured and killed for their activities. Dr. Webb stood up. Your Honor, I request permission to cross-reference these records with our captured hegemony files. Permission granted, Sarah said. Webb activated his tablet and began comparing the data. After several minutes, he looked up with amazement. The records match, he announced. I can verify at least 60% of these operations from our own intelligence files. This is all true. The courtroom erupted in discussion. The neutral observers spoke excitedly among themselves. Some of the human officers looked confused. The alien prisoners showed various reactions from anger to relief. Sarah called for order. Zareth, are any of the bridge builders currently in our custody? Yes, at least 12 that I know of. They are in your prison cells being treated as war criminals. This was Sarah's worst fear. Humans were punishing aliens who had tried to help them. Give us their names. Zareth read from a list. Several names belonged to prisoners who had claimed they were forced to fight, but others were surprising. One was a hegemony general who had seemed proud of his actions during initial questioning. General Vexstar is on your list, Sarah said. But he commanded the attack on the mining station at Titan 7. He also made sure the evacuation ships escaped, Zareth replied. He deliberately delayed his attack by 6 hours to give families time to flee. He saved 3,000 lives. Sarah felt a weight in her stomach. General Vexstar had been scheduled for execution next week. The testimony continued for hours. Zareth provided detailed information about resistance operations throughout the war. She named heroes and villains from every species. She showed that the conflict had been far more complex than anyone realized. But the most shocking revelation came near the end of her testimony. There was a plan, Zareth said quietly. A plan to assassinate Crixtal and end the war early. The courtroom fell completely silent. Tell us about this plan, Sarah said. It was called Operation Final Bridge. A group of bridge builders infiltrated Crixtal's personal ship. They planned to kill him and broadcast a surrender message to all hegemony forces. What happened? Zareth looked directly at Crixtal. He discovered the plot. He had all the conspirators tortured to death. Then he ordered increased attacks on human civilians as punishment for the assassination attempt. Crixtal's face showed no emotion. Security requires harsh measures. Those bridge builders died trying to end the war and save lives on both sides. Zareth said, their sacrifice should be remembered. As the day ended, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the new information. The war had not been a simple conflict between humans and aliens. It had been a complex struggle with heroes and villains on all sides. The ethereal collective observer approached Sarah as the court adjourned. "Commander Chun," the ancient being said, "this testimony changes much. How will you decide justice now?" Sarah looked around the courtroom. Alien prisoners sat next to their guards. Some were clearly guilty of terrible crimes. Others might be heroes who had saved human lives. The truth was more complicated than anyone had imagined. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, "but we have to try." That night, Sarah could not sleep. She walked the halls of Justice Station thinking about the testimony. Somewhere in the prison cells below were aliens who had risked everything to help humanity. But there were also creatures who had taken pleasure in genocide. The trial had started with simple questions about guilt and punishment. Now it faced much harder questions about justice, mercy, and the complexity of war. Tomorrow would bring the final testimonies and then the most difficult decision of Sarah's life. The galaxy was watching to see what humans would do with the power to judge their enemies. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than ever. Sarah Chun stood alone in her office looking out at the stars. 3 days had passed since Zarath's testimony. 3 days of reviewing evidence, checking records, and making the hardest decisions of her life. The trial was over. All the witnesses had spoken. All the evidence had been presented. Now came the judgment that would shape the future of the galaxy. Dr. Webb knocked on her door and entered. He carried a thick folder with the final recommendations from the investigation team. "We've finished our analysis," Webb said as he sat down. "Every prisoner has been classified into one of 4 categories." Sarah turned from the window. "Tell me." Webb opened the folder. Category 1. War criminals who planned and eagerly participated in genocide. These include Crickstall and 17 others. They showed no mercy and feel no guilt. Category 2. Military. Officers who followed orders but tried to minimize damage, like General Vextar, who delayed attacks to allow evacuations. 43 prisoners fall into this group. Sarah nodded. The categories made sense, but the decisions would still be difficult. Category 3. Beings who were forced to fight under threat of death to their families or species. This includes most of the Veltari delegation and others. 61 prisoners total. And Category 4? Webb smiled slightly. Active resistance fighters who helped humans during the war. 12 prisoners who should never have been in custody. At all, Sarah felt relief about the last group. At least those heroes would be freed. But the others presented harder choices. "What are your recommendations?" she asked. "The investigation team is divided," Webb admitted. "Some want harsh punishment for all participants. Others argue for mercy based on circumstances. You have to make the final decision." A communication alert sounded. Lieutenant Torres appeared on the screen. "Commander, the representatives are arriving for the verdict announcement. The entire galaxy is watching." Sarah looked at her reflection in the dark window. In 1 hour, she would announce decisions that would affect billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. The weight felt crushing. "Send them to the main courtroom," she said. "We'll begin in 30 minutes. As Webb left to prepare the files, Sarah thought about everything she had learned during the trial. The war had not been simple. Good and evil existed on all sides. Some aliens had committed terrible crimes. Others had been heroes. Most fell somewhere in between. The courtroom was completely full when Sarah entered. Representatives from dozens of species filled every seat. News cameras from across the galaxy recorded everything. The moment had come. Sarah took her place at the judge's bench and looked out at the assembled beings. In the front row sat the prisoners, some defiant, others hopeful, a few terrified. "After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony," Sarah began, "this tribunal has reached its verdicts." The room was completely silent. "Crickstall, former Supreme Coordinator of the Zephyrian Hegemony, you are guilty of genocide, war, crimes, and crimes against sentience. You planned and ordered the systematic destruction of human civilization. You showed no mercy to civilians, children, or even members of your own alliance who disagreed with your actions. Crystal stood tall, showing no emotion. However, Sarah continued, this tribunal rejects the death penalty. Instead, you are sentenced to life imprisonment with mandatory service in the reconstruction of the worlds you destroyed. You will spend the rest of your existence helping to rebuild what you tore down? Gasps came from the audience. Many had expected execution. Crystal spoke for the first time. I do not accept this mercy. I would prefer death to serving humans. Your preferences are no longer relevant, Sarah replied calmly. Next case, she continued through the Category 1 prisoners. Each received life sentences with reconstruction service. No executions, no torture. Just the requirement to spend their lives fixing the damage they had caused. Admiral Harrison, sitting in the human delegation, looked unhappy. Sarah could see he wanted harsher punishment. General Vexstar, Sarah called next. You commanded forces that attacked human settlements. However, evidence shows you deliberately delayed attacks to allow civilian evacuations. You saved thousands of human lives while following orders you could not refuse. Vexstar, a large insect-like being, trembled as he waited for his sentence. You are guilty of participating in war crimes, but with exceptional mitigating circumstances. You are sentenced to 10 years of community service helping war refugees of all species. After that, you will be free. Relief was visible on Vexstar's face. 10 years was harsh but fair. Sarah worked through the Category 2 prisoners. Each received sentences of 5 to 15 years of community service. They would help rebuild, assist refugees, or work in other ways to repair the damage of war. The Category 3 prisoners faced even lighter sentences. Most received 1 to 3 years of supervised community service. Their circumstances had been truly desperate. Finally, Sarah reached the moment everyone was waiting for. The following prisoners have been reclassified as heroes of the resistance, she announced. Zareth of the Seventh Circle, Velenavi of the Crystalline Collective, and 10 others. You risked your lives to help humans during the war. You are hereby released with full pardons and the gratitude of humanity. The 12 resistance fighters stood up as their chains were removed. Some wept with relief. Others stood in stunned silence, but Sarah was not finished. This tribunal also announces the creation of the Galactic Justice Council, she said. New organization dedicated to preventing future genocides and ensuring that all sentient beings are treated with dignity. The ethereal collective representative glowed brighter with interest. The council will include representatives from every species in the galaxy, including reformed members of the former hegemony. Its purpose is not human dominance but galactic cooperation. Sarah stood up and addressed the entire courtroom. Humans did not fight this war to become your masters. We fought to prove that different species can coexist without the strong destroying the weak. War was just the beginning. Now comes the harder task of building something better. She paused and looked at each section of the audience. To the survivors of human colonies, your dead will be remembered and honored. Justice has been served, not through revenge, but through the promise that such crimes will never happen again. To the former members of the hegemony, your species are not condemned forever. Those who committed crimes will face punishment, but those who seek redemption will find it. Your children will grow up in a galaxy where they are judged by their own actions, not the sins of their parents. To the neutral observers, humanity offers partnership, not conquest. We invite you to join us in building a galactic community based on law, justice, and mutual respect. Crystal interrupted from his seat. Your mercy is weakness. Other species will see this and attack you again. Sarah looked at him calmly. Perhaps. But if they do, they will face the united response of all civilized beings. Because today we prove that civilization is stronger than barbarism. The ethereal collective representative rose and spoke in its wind chime voice. In 10,000 years of observation, we have never seen a species handle victory with such wisdom. Humanity has earned our respect. One by one, other observers stood and made similar statements. The Merchant Guild offered trade partnerships. The Scientific Alliance proposed joint research projects. Even some former hegemony species expressed interest in joining the new galactic order. As the session ended, people began to leave, but many stayed to speak with the human delegation. New alliances were forming in real time. Admiral Harrison approached Sarah as she gathered her papers. "I thought you were making a mistake," he admitted. "But watching their reactions, I think you might be right. Fear makes enemies. Mercy might make friends." Dr. Webb joined them, smiling for the first time in months. The psychological profiles are fascinating. Even the hardline prisoners are showing signs of attitude change. This approach might actually work. That evening, Sarah stood once again at her window looking at the stars, but now she was not alone. Zareth stood beside her, no longer a prisoner but a friend. "What will you do now?" Sarah asked. "Help build the Justice Council," Zareth replied. "My people need to learn that strength comes from protecting others, not destroying them." "And the other resistance fighters?" "They will return to their worlds and tell the story of what happened here. How humans could have chosen revenge but chose justice instead." Sarah nodded. "The hardest part was over, but the real work was just beginning." Years later, historians would mark this trial as the moment the galaxy changed. Not because of the punishment given to war criminals, but because of the mercy shown to those who sought redemption. The first joint human-alien colonies were already being planned. Former enemies worked together to heal the wounds of war. Children of different species played together in schools that taught cooperation instead of conquest. Crystal and his followers would spend their lives in reconstruction service, slowly, learning that building was harder but more meaningful than destroying. Some would never change, but others, seeing the galaxy humanity was creating, would begin to understand what they had nearly destroyed. The war had tested humanity's ability to fight. The trial had tested something more important, their ability to win without losing their souls. In choosing justice over vengeance, humans